name is Sergio Yaku. I'm the global chair or co-chair of EvalIndigenous. And then I'm so happy to welcome you on this special webinar. We are pretty happy. Together, we are going to explore there is a briefing finding about a study conducted by our colleague Ponge. We have a secretary, our colleague Cynthia, and background. She'll be there, leading the secretary, to record all the comments and all the queries from all participants. We pay a lot of attention about your comments because these comments and those questions are going to help us to improve the way we have to get the final copy of our ethical protocol in evaluations. And then I have to add that this webinar is we are seeing as a kind of collaboration with AFREA because it is a complementary webinar because complementary research about the way we look at ethical protocol for evaluation in Africa. We are going to have the same ethical protocol for Asia and then for other task force in the world, including North America. So we just start with African side, and then we want to look at a complementary ethical protocol with our AFREA networks. So this set, let me just open the webinar by talk about briefly, give you some history about EvalIndigenous. Our colleague Link couldn't make it because she's really quite have family concern this morning. So for those of you who don't know EvalIndigenous, EvalIndigenous is one of the 5 networks of Eval Partners. And then Eval Partners, as you know, for those who know, but those who don't know, is like the biggest umbrella of network in evaluations. Eval Partners is set up, I've been created since 2012. I'm happy that to see some founder, Umul Zenda, who are the chairman at the time online. And then I welcome you to this webinar. So currently, the management of Eval Partners have been revised last year. So we have an ESCOM, executive committee, and then we have also the program committee, and then we also have 2 flagship of Eval Partners. The first flagship, just like some kind of resumes, is the first flagship about strengthening national evaluation capacity for country-led evaluation system. And the second one is just, we're going to start very soon, is on evident matters for the SDG and beyond. So finally, as I said before, we have 5 networks on Eval Partners. The first one, as you know, is the Eval SDG. We have Eval Youth, we have Eval Gender Plus, of course, EvalIndigenous, and finally, the Global Parliamentary Forum on Evaluations. This briefly about Eval Partners, and then to keep it short, but you can just know more about Eval Partners by simply clicking on the Eval Partner on Google, and you have more detailed information about these fantastic umbrellas. Then let me just hand over to my colleague, my co-chair, Fiona. Fiona is from New Zealand, and then she prepared a presentation. Fiona, over to you. Maybe you introduce before, and then Ponge will just share the video. Thank you so much.
You just share the video. That'll be
okay.
Kia ora and warm Pacific greetings to you all from here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. My name is Fiona Cram, and along with Serge Eric, I'm co-chair of Indigenous Evaluation. My dad is Māori from the Ngāti Pahuera tribe on the east coast of our North Island, and my mum's Pākehā or white, also from the east coast of the North Island, but originally from Denmark. It's my pleasure to be here with you today and to talk to you a little bit about the background to Indigenous evaluation and some of the work that we've been doing. Just wanted to start with a question that often vexes non-Indigenous people. And that is, who is Indigenous? Often the definitions that I see relate to people being the first peoples of the land. I know that that's the definition we use here for Māori, tangata whenua, the peoples of the land. Other countries use blood quantums, genetic foundations of indigeneity, Some people talk about race, some people talk about ethnicity. The other thing I see a lot of is that being Indigenous is often associated with colonisation, dispossession and marginalisation. This is definitely something that's common to so many Indigenous people around the world, the marginalisation and the loss of land that's come through colonisation. Most importantly, I think, is a self-definition. So who self-identifies as Indigenous or tribal? And that's related to ethnicity, to culture, to knowledge base, to a commitment to Indigenous agenda and to the passing of our ancestral knowledge onto our new generations. If we think about Indigenous people, the count is that there are over 370 million Indigenous peoples around the globe, across more than 70 countries from the Arctic to the South Pacific. And so there are an awful lot of us. And so when we came together as EvalIndigenous, we thought that there'd be a lot more strength in us connecting and working with one another for the agendas in evaluation that often are common to us. So that might be social justice, equity, decolonisation. I think most of all, we seek a world in which there is room for many worlds. So we just want to decenter whiteness a little bit and make room for Indigenous peoples, alongside often peoples from other minoritised peoples. EvalIndigenous aims to advance the recognition, value and involvement of Indigenous peoples in global evaluation, practice and endeavours. We also aim to promote and support Indigenous peoples' evaluation agendas. So putting Indigenous people at the forefront of evaluation with Indigenous peoples, and also promoting Indigenous peoples' evaluation and decision-making models that might not align with Western models, but are actually local, valuable, practice-based models that work in Indigenous communities. As I said, we think that there's a lot of value in us joining together on these aims and in this agenda, because we have a lot of things in common and a lot of words that continue to bind us and give us that common agenda. EvalIndigenous has been undertaking a little bit of work around the globe. Our focus this year and next year is in Africa, in the Asia Pacific and Latin America. At the start of last year, our Indigenous Māori evaluation organisation, Mātirai, held an Indigenous evaluation conference in Rotorua, in Aotearoa, and that was amazing. And lots of people came from overseas, and we were so happy to be able to host them here. And wonderful to see Serge Eric dance. The focus of this is on hearing voices, as I say, advancing evaluation and facilitating knowledge transfer. We also have an Indigenous Voices project, which comes across in our YouTube channel. And the idea of this project is to hear from Indigenous evaluators and people in communities who are thinking about Indigenous evaluation, so traditional knowledge holders. We wanted to put these voices at the forefront so that evaluators going into our communities wouldn't have any excuse not to team up with, work alongside Indigenous evaluators. We have an Indigenous Evaluation Atlas project. We want to build a directory of Indigenous evaluators so that the people who are working in our communities can find us and work with us. And in 2018, we did a survey of the voluntary organisations just to gather information about Indigenous engagement. So I hope you enjoy this webinar. We've been so happy to support the work that you're about to see, and we just hope it continues. We hope that we get an opportunity at the AFRIA conference next year to present virtually. It'd be wonderful to be there in person in the embodiment of us all. But in the meantime, I hope that you and your loved ones stay safe and well, and in what has been a difficult year for many of us around the globe. So my best wishes to you all, and I'll hand the presentation over.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. And then, yes, as you said, we are preparing to partner with AFRIA with upcoming conference next year. because we are already starting discussing with Afrea, and then on the way we have to prepare to get like kind of a special space at this conference in Addis Ababa. In the meantime, also, as I said before, this webinar is the first series of webinar because we're also planning to talk next year during the CS conference on how we can decolonize evaluations worldwide, not only in Africa. So also we are going to also get this as part of our 2021 activities to see the way we can better frame and then have like at least 2 or 1 webinar on how to decolonize evaluations and involving all people and participants, not only indigenous people, but all actors, because all of us, we are the actors of change in the world. So as I think, Fiona, you share many things about EvalIndigenous, but I just want to say to resume 2 things about EvalIndigenous for which our colleague to know better. Remember that EvalIndigenous is only just 2 years old now. It's a small baby among the 5 networks of Eva partners. And then we have EvalIndigenous Network Committee, managed by myself and Fiona. And then we have Global Context Task Force and the Practitioner Task Force. And then Ponge is the Task Force for Africa. We have our colleague Nikki from the United States. Anyway, we got all those things. And then the way we are working, we have we are sharing our work within the Practitioner Task Force and the Global Context Task Force. I mean, like, we cover and then we want to be the biggest umbrella of indigenous evaluation worldwide, including people and indigenous community of VOPES. So let me just give it now. Let's go back to our special guest, Ponge, because maybe it has a history. Last year we launched, the preparation of having this survey, and then this study about how we can just better frame the ethical practice in evaluation. And then our colleague Ponge, the African Task Force leaders, volunteer to work on this. So I think I have to hand over to you. It's better go to share with you the way from where we start and how we come up with this finding. And then from there, we go directly into the core content of our webinar. Ponge, over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Chairman Saj and Fiona, for giving me this opportunity to share the research findings with the global audience. Actually, as Chairman Eric has just said, we did come up with this as one of the ideas of how we can entrench ethical protocol in evaluations in the African context. So the background of this was that we did some background study and came up with a draft protocol. And beyond that, we also did a survey on an African audience on their views about indigenous African ethical protocols. And this will constitute one of what we are going to share here, as well as the content of the draft protocol for your input. It had already been shared with some of you on email, but we did not get a sufficient response. So we are thinking that the input you're going to give us today will really help in developing this protocol to its final form. So that is the outline of my presentation. I have a preamble there, then I'll give you a short definition of the key concepts, the purpose of the ethical protocol. Then I will talk about the question of definition. Who is an indigenous African and who is an African in the first place? Then we'll build a business case for the indigenous African ethical protocol, and particularly why the protocol is important. In our preamble, I've got this from one of our Made in Africa greats, Chilisa, and his colleagues, who say in their book, in the chapter on conceptualizing evaluation in African context, which is actually edited by Fiona, among others. They say that in the process of carrying out any form of evaluation in African context, such an evaluation must be based on indigenized African evaluation conceptual frameworks that require evaluators to do the following 3 things, which I put in red: recognize, appreciate, and include. And what does do they have to include? That's the African cultures, languages, values, ways of knowing, and knowledge systems. So this quotation really impressed me because it is like a backbone to the whole work that we are doing. Ideally, we are not reinventing the wheel, but we are just standing on the shoulders of other greats who have come before us. The definition of some of the key concepts that we are going to talk about in this particular presentation are, for example, EvalIndigenous. What do you mean by EvalIndigenous? I think Fiona did talk about that in our presentation, and also Chairman Eric has talked about it. It's one of the networks that was formed as part of Eval Partners, which is ideally a global movement to support the evaluation discipline to become a core instrument for social, economic, and environmental transformation. Then we'll talk about Indigenous Africans a lot in this presentation. So the draft conceptualization of Indigenous African are people who are natives of the African continent or any other person residing in Africa who holds the values and aspirations of the African communal spirit. Here, I think the key concepts are: one, native of the African continent, and two, residing in Africa, and any other person who holds the values and aspirations of the African communal spirit. By definition, you fall under Indigenous African. Then Made in Africa evaluation, I think Chairman Saj should have mentioned about this briefly, but he did acknowledge the presence of some of our greats who are who played a great role in coming up with this Made in Africa evaluation. We have Professor Zenda Ophir among the audience, and we also have Umul Kairi Batal. Yes, these have been really great and instrumental in coming up with the Made in Africa evaluation, especially after the Afrea conference. I don't know whether it was the third or the fourth, Eric? The one in Niger.
Niger was the fourth one.
Yeah, the fourth Afrea conference.
1, 2, 3.
Yes.
Yeah, fourth.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is one of the driving pillars of Afrean activities as at the moment. And they have been working on guidelines to guide evaluation in Africa. And I think this will come as a complementary to this ethical protocol. And then for indigenous knowledge, I've conceptualized it as knowledge that is generated, preserved, and transmitted in a traditional context, but usually associated with the traditional community through a sense of communal ownership, custodianship, and cultural responsibility. Now, who is an evaluator? I think different authors have come up with different definitions of who an evaluator is, but in our particular context, we'll be talking of an evaluator as a person who seeks to generate knowledge in a specific context with the sole purpose of informing decisions for purposes of learning and improvement of interventions. So the key idea here is that there must be interventions for defined stakeholders, and then the evaluator comes in to generate knowledge that will help in informing decisions. Then ethics, as used in this protocol, refers to the moral principles that govern the behavior of a professional in conducting an activity. And protocol generally refers to a set of guidelines that guide a professional practice. And in this particular case, we are talking about evaluation as a profession. So it is a set of rules, official rules, that is, of procedure that govern the affairs of evaluation in an African context. Just like of late, we've been having a COVID protocol. They're just guidelines on how we need to behave in the COVID situation. Right. Now, what is the purpose of this ethical protocol? Generally, we've come up with three main purposes for the protocol. The first one is to promote the full implementation of ethical principles when engaging in monitoring and evaluation activities with the African people. The second one is to support monitoring and evaluation practices that respect, and the key word here is respect the rights of indigenous African people, and their benefits must be critical for any monitoring and evaluation activity. Then the third one is that the ethical protocol is designed to be used as a framework for discussing ethical issues and for helping indigenous African people to recognize and resolve particular ethical issues that may arise in the process of monitoring or evaluation. Maybe Eric can give us guidance. Eric, do we respond to this in the chat box or in the breakout rooms?
Yeah, I think as we are just having about 25 people, 23 participants, and then 2 people already asking the question about which African evaluator. I think we have our colleague Lucrece, who has the same questions, and Umu also have one question about how we can translate in French. We can just leave people share their thought about it, but just they have to feel as Africans, you know, whatever they are from, Asia, Europe, you know, North America. Just feel it like maybe we can just translate the terms. So we just go to like getting 10 minutes or 15 minutes because we're not too much. And then in 2 break-room sections, we can say 5 break-room sections, that's better. And then in each break-up section, they can just decide to have a moderator and the facilitators. So in such a way, we can just get some kind of their own way of thinking about who could be considered as African or indigenous. So I hope this works with you guys. And then I will set up the rooms. We give me some time, so I set up the room now. And then we just get like 4 rooms, that's better. 4 is better. And then option, we have, will be notified. I mean, the moderator will be notified 30 seconds before the end. And then so that you can see they can see the countdown, you know, clocks on the last minute. So we have, let's say 20 minutes because we are not so much. And then people can just share their thought about how they see the definitions. I think this is the best way. Yes, of course, the presentation at the end, we are going to share the presentation after the webinar to everyone.
Good morning, Ponge. I'm so happy to meet and see and have a chance to talk. I'll be very happy to facilitate, but please have a backup in case my connection gets bad, because I'm connecting from Nouakchott, Mauritania. We are like the worst connections in the world.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, but for now it's okay. So I believe we are discussing about who we consider to be African.
An indigenous African.
Okay, so how many French-speaking people in this session? Just raise your hand so I know. Because it might be a French issue. When you use the word indigenous and you translate in French, it gives something that really is controversial.
Sure.
Yes, that's the issue. And I understand when I read your definition that you had on this PowerPoint, it's a comprehensive definition, and even the literature and the research defines indigenous as the value of the roots. Those who were rooted in African culture, history, community-based, etc., etc. But when you translate into French, it gives indigène. And indigène in French is it's like nigger.
Yeah.
You understand what I mean?
The negative
and if you say an African francophone, you are indigène, I'm not sure he will feel proud to be indigène. So one thing is, but let's put this into bracket. I don't want this to focus the discussion too much, but let's just put it as an additional information towards the francophone audience, and let's together see how to how to resolve this language issue. Okay, so
could you maybe make a suggestion of what?
Yes, please.
Could you make a suggestion of what would be the ideal translation of this in French?
Yes, I'm thinking of that. Yes, I will in the course of the discussion, and I have been, as we speak, I'm even looking into a paper that was submitted towards a journal, and that is one of the issues is this question. I don't think it's an easy answer, but it's important to be aware of that, and then perhaps in the definitions, just to make sure to define clearly what we're talking about. That's why this session is important, actually.
Thank you, Umo.
Okay, so I see we are Beverly, Lenny's, Richard, we're just 3, and me 4, and you are so we are 5.
Yeah.
Okay, so the floor is yours. I'm facilitating, so, and the question is, who do we consider?
Actually, I should be listening because I've already given my perspective of who I think should be an indigenous African.
Okay, you have taken the floor. So who wants to share to be next?
Okay, so
I
will
invite
share.
you to unmute. Yes, please.
Great. So I am from the Caribbean Evaluators International. I'm in Trinidad and Tobago, so I'm in the Caribbean. So we're the last of the island, and the island chain with the most southerly isles. And so you see my face. So clearly there's an African component in my ancestry, etc. And so I know that for some of my Caribbean colleagues, the idea of having to be identified as an indigenous African, seeing that there's so many other mixtures here, because I look like this, but in my history, there are other races involved. And if you look at my family, you will see a mixture of how we all look with the same or 1 or 2 or 3 last names. So defining who is an indigenous African must not marginalize those of us who are of African descent or who have that in our DNA. So that's my comment.
Okay, Lenny, just a clarification. Is it linked, because I think your case is very interesting, because you have the roots, the culture, probably, I'm not sure, you will tell us. You have the diversity, and you live in a diverse community where people come from various origins, and you look different. So how important is the notion of color of the skin, for instance, being black? Does an African has to be black? How black? Dark black, brown black, or you see? So the second thing is, how do you feel? What maybe types of culture component do you think matter the most in your case? These are my 2 questions.
Right. So just remember, it's not a pretty story, but those of us who look like me and live in the Caribbean came here through slavery. So it's not that we were able to bring all traditions in a nice, peaceful manner, and it's not that we were allowed, even our ancestors were even allowed to practice certain traditions. Okay. And so throughout the region, throughout the Caribbean region, I mean, I can talk for my country, but throughout the Caribbean region, French, English, Dutch, Spanish are spoken. And that's a direct, that is linked directly to who colonized the 37 countries touched by the Caribbean Sea. Okay? But and then also and so whoever colonized, who was the last colonizer, that language was there. So Trinidad and Tobago, where I live, is a unique case, because we have people of African descent, people from India, people from China, from Syria, Syrian, Lebanese, because people came for different reasons, okay, at that point in time. Now, we do have in the region and I would say maybe an awareness of our, and forgive my word, Africanness, because we do observe Emancipation Day. And that Emancipation Day would be when slavery ended throughout the region. So in different countries, they would celebrate it or observe it differently. And certainly we'll get all the African attire. People try their best to talk about the links we have to the African continent. That is certainly there. We do have people now, especially I would say in the last 20 to 25 years. We have a lot of people from the African continent living throughout the Caribbean region, right? And they're here and they're sharing ideas. We do have, for instance, when I did my studies, my PhD at Kent State University in Ohio, I had a colleague from Benin and a colleague from Zambia, right? We shared accommodation, living accommodation. And my colleague from Zambia, she made something with white cornmeal that she would eat the way rice is eaten in Western societies or in India. And the person from Benin called it by one name. She called it by another name. And in the Caribbean, I grew up with a dish that came from the African tradition with yellow cornmeal called kuku. But it's eaten with fish and peas and so on in replacement of rice as well, but very different. So I'm saying that there's some things that translated that I suppose still came through, right? But in terms of really understanding, and again, forgive my lack of sophistication in the word I'm going to use, our traditions, our whatever tribal connections we may have had, whatever understanding of our roots, I am not sure that is, I'm sure in terms of education that that it wasn't valued and taught to us. However, we know that we have brothers and sisters in a whole continent that look like us, and we feel an affinity, to them, right? We know we are connected, right? And so in that, so that's what I'm saying. In your definition of an indigenous an indigenous African, somehow include us. I don't know if you would really value us as diaspora, but certainly there are people in different parts of the world looking like me, whose ancestors came from the African continent because of slavery, right? That are part or are linked to the African continent.
Yeah, I think that's a really good understanding. I do appreciate it, Lenise. Especially, I've taken note of the need not to marginalize those of the African descent, the need for diversity, recognizing diversity of the community, respect for traditions. And when you say that you appreciate your Africanness by observing the Emancipation Day, right? I don't know, maybe Beverly, I'm not sure where you come from. Maybe you could give us an understanding of what you may think as being a definition of indigenous, not necessarily indigenous African per se, but indigenous from your perspective.
Indigenous, yes, yeah.
Yes.
Well, I'm no expert on this, and I'm here more to learn from you. I'm in Washington State in the United States, which is on the Pacific Northwest. And, you know, in the US, when people are talking about indigenous, we're usually referring to Native Americans who were, you know, the original people on this continent. So that's the definition that we've been using. You know, it's interesting because as I've been trying to learn and am learning more about Indigenous cultures in the US, and I've lived in Indigenous communities at various times and have been involved with a number of people. I'm very good friends with Nikki Bowman, who you probably know because she's one of our leading people in this country in evaluation in Indigenous cultures. But anyway, we've had that kind of what would be a pretty clear definition of Indigenous for this country. But I'm so interested in what Lanice is saying, in that when you get dispersed to another place, do you claim Indigenousness or to that particular country? You know, like I've been thinking a lot about this because all of my ancestors are from Sweden, from peasant farms in Sweden. And it would be my grandparents and great-grandparents who came to the US. And so there's a lot of the things that, like Nikki talks about in my experience with Indigenous cultures in this country, that I say, gosh, that is just like me. I mean, I have those same kind of roots from coming from an Indigenous culture that was carried, because in this country, I grew up in a rural farming community. And so I had that same history, and I've been, incorporated into the larger Western society here, but I feel a deep sense of connection. So I'm really, just personally trying to understand more about what Indigenous means, and have really enjoyed so much learning from all of you.
That's a really good question that you've asked. I would wish to see how it will be handled in the plenary. Because, for example, you say you've your parents migrated from Sweden to the US, and we have Fiona, whose parents originally were from Denmark, and they're now in New Zealand. I would wish to know whether you can reclaim your indigeneity of your place of origin.
I'm so thankful to hear about the testimonies, the different testimonies, different backgrounds. What I understand, I think the common trend is that we are all Indigenous from somewhere. And we have all been transiting from one place to another place. So there are two concepts that maybe we need to, and the fact that we are talking about Indigenous versus non-Indigenous is the same fact that we're talking about, let's say, mainstream versus non-mainstream. It's because some cultures have taken the lead and decided that this is the norm and everything else is the exception. And that's why the word Indigenous, the concept is controversial, because we are all Indigenous.
I was going to, and I'm sorry I just wanted to add that when Beverly was talking about just defining Indigenous, at one point I had my issue was that Indigenous was equated with lack of sophistication, lack of formality, lack of development. And so I will also say that as we define Indigenous, we have to dispel that negative perspective.
Yes.
Because I think it's simplistic. That's it. Indigenous is also linked with simplistic, and those are things I think we need to dispel as we define who is, what this Indigenous means.
Could I just add something to what you're saying? Because the thing that I've become much more have become focused on is that I think there's a deep understanding of community and of a way of operating as partners and communities and being connected and a whole interconnectedness that, I think in one of those presentations already, I can't remember who had said that, but that you talk about communal spirit. And I think that was in part of your definition, wasn't it, Pandri, what you said? And I think I've been reading a lot of work about the difference between a partnership orientation and a dominance orientation and this continuum. And that I think what we're really talking about is deeply embedded in the Indigenous is that deep understanding of community that's so much deeper. You know, it's not at all, I mean, like, I appreciated what Denise was saying, because there's a depth of understanding about how you function in community that I think is what we are raising up with Indigenous, and a sense of connection to the earth and, you know, the wholeness of life.
Guys, Victor is our task force leader from Latin America, based in Colombia. So I think it worked very well. I hope the time was not so long. We just decided to give more time to people so that the interaction is more dynamic. So as we agree, each rooms, each moderator or note takers, I don't know the way you organize, you have 2 minutes to present. And then please remember, just copy and paste your answer on the chat button, please. So let's start with room 1, the first room where we have Cynthia, Fiona, Victor's, and Zenda. Over to you to present. You have 2 minutes, and then you can just share the definition and explain the understanding behind. And then our colleague Cynthia, she's leading the secretary. She will just copy and keep it in forward notes. Over to you, room 1.
We had a great discussion.
Oh.
I think we decided that the UN definition was a little old-fashioned about who is Indigenous and who's an Indigenous African, and that it was a whole of continent discussion, the Made in Africa initiative, that everyone could be included. And that I just thought it was wonderful that people were talking about it.
Can you copy and paste your definition on the chat button, please? Copy and paste it there so that Cynthia can record all those notes. Excellent. Let's see what other colleague thinks about room 2. Let's move to room 2. We have Beverly, Lenise, and our elder Omo. Please, over to you, please.
My connection went bad at some time. So please go ahead. If you miss something that I have, I will add.
Okay. Funnily enough, I decided to go analog, and I just put the notes on my piece of paper. One thing that we did talk about was the value. The need to appreciate the value of the roots as one of the defining characteristics of who an Indigenous African is. But then we realized that there are some negative connotations that come with the word Indigenous when it is translated into French. So we tasked our lady Umo to try and come up with a translation that will dispel the negative connotations of the word Indigenous. Then we did have representation from the Caribbeans, and one of the key issues they mentioned was the need not to marginalize those of the African descent. There are others who have roots in Africa but were dislocated to other parts of the world. So we need not to marginalize those of the African descent. Then the need for diversity of the community, this one need to be recognized. Respect for traditions. Then appreciating Africanness. And our lady from the Caribbean did observe that in the Caribbean, they celebrate emancipation, they observe Emancipation Day. And this is like celebrating the links that they have with the African continent. So we need to understand the roots. And there was observation from Beverly that we need to appreciate the natives of the land, that is the original people of the continent. So they're like the indigenous people of that particular continent. But then she asked a question which I think Fiona could even help us understand. What happens to those who are displaced to other lands? For Beverly, her roots are in Sweden. The parents were from Sweden, and then they relocated to the US. Now, can she reclaim her indigeneity of Sweden? That is the question. For Fiona, her roots are in Denmark. Is it Denmark? And now she's in New Zealand. Can she reclaim her indigeneity of Denmark? Right. And lastly, we said that for us to understand indigenous context, there must be a deep understanding of the community and especially the shared communal spirit. Thank you. If I missed anything, maybe my group members can add.
Thank you so much. Excellent. Well said. And then remember that you have to copy and paste on the chat button. And then so that everyone can just get the record. And Cynthia is just going to easy the job of Cynthia. Thanks so much. Excellent. Let's move to room 3, where we have Siku, Lucrece, Matt, and Useni. Actually, I think you saw it. I was adding people from time to time, you know, because other colleagues just joined now. So over to you, room 3.
Hi guys, this is Shiko. I'll give a quick summary and my teammates can top up in the event that I leave anything out. So according to us, we agreed that the description of indigenous literally involves, you know, local culture, local language, local practices, and those having room to thrive, and those not being deleted. Unfortunately, in the case of Africa, in the 3 countries where we're all from, Senegal, Cameroon, and Kenya, we were colonized. So with the process of colonialization, there was the deleting of local cultures and acclimatization of other languages, like say English and French. In all the 3 countries, the official languages revolve towards, you know, English and French, French in Senegal, and then Kenya, Swahili and English, to where then it becomes a bit difficult, especially in a school system which is nationwide. When you go over there and the learning language, the language of instruction, the language of taking exams is in English, it becomes a bit different to hang on to the local languages, especially if there's nowhere to find a place to learn those. So we agreed that it is imperative that these local languages, local culture, local practices move from one generation to another. We also spoke about migration and the effect that it has on indigenousness, by virtue of maybe, you know, better opportunities, school, war, whatever. People have moved from, say, their home country elsewhere. And at that point, our conversation is when they move with the culture and continue learning the language, passing the customs and the traditions and the practices down, you know, generation upon generation, can they still claim to be indigenous? Or when they move over there and embrace the new life and don't carry the languages over, is that also indigenous? So that's where we're at. Thank you. And guys, if I left something out, Oseni and
No, I think
please.
it's really great. Yeah, it's a good summary of our discussions. Yeah,
yes.
Thank you. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Well said, Siku. And then this is very good enough. And then Zenda was just pointing something very important also, because people from other origins, you know, are living and residing in one place. You know, how do we just? Yeah, I think the research should be evolved, and then that's why I think on the presentation of Ponge, he said that a part of those who are native, who are born somewhere, any other person residing or holding the value and aspiration of the place to be considered as indigenous. I think Victor also said the same thing on the same way, and then he shared it to those who moved to Latin America and now considering, you know, as indigenous people in Latin America. Excellent. So let's move to the last room, room 4, where we also highest people. I see Rutu, I see Professor Florence. And over to you guys. And then Jackson also. Welcome, Jackson. Do share with us with your deliberation, please. And then remember that you have to copy and paste your answer on the chat button. Please don't forget that. Over to you. Room 4.
We had a very rich discussion, very dynamic discussion, a very fascinating discussion around ingenuity in the sense that, you know, some of the thinking was about originating from Africa, but at the same time querying the notion of how is being of Africa a bit indigenous, particularly when we're talking about some of the early peoples of Africa, and where have they gone in that process. But there was also something about what people shared was a need to identify ancestry in terms of ingenuity, in terms of generations. And it's a claim sometimes you make for yourself, but there's a kind of recognition that because of let me say, the kind of mixing of culture, that there might be a diluting of what that identity might be about. So there was focus on about being a natural born member, claiming your place and having some depth about ancestry, but also not being born in Africa, but respecting all that it brings as in terms of a foundation. And ask the question, can they be called Africans? And I think that question has come up in previous presentations. So can you still be African if you're not in the African continent, but you still hold the values and the traditions, and you have an alignment of who you are in the world? Are you still indigenous, even if though you're not in that place? Then there's the link to colonization. I'm born in Trinidad. I would often say the indigenous people are the Amerindians, but as somebody who has been taken from Africa to the Caribbean, in terms of my ancestry, there's a strength in Trinidad which want to make me feel like I'm indigenous, but we know there's peoples there before me. What does that mean in that context? There's also something too about the United Nations definition. I know somebody said it's kind of outdated, but it's also an important marker, because the disruptor that colonization has played on indigeneity has been an important one in terms of how it's really shifted people and shifted their way in the world. And I think, I didn't understand fully what somebody was saying, but the Kenyan cowboy, will the Kenyan cowboy be seen as somebody who is indigenous with all the privileges that they have because of their whiteness? And saying, is that something that also needs to be considered when we're thinking about ingenuity? So a fascinating, interesting conversation. We didn't come up with a full answer, but this is what we thought.
Interesting, yeah, interesting, very interesting. And then that I was watching a video 2 days ago on my flight from Addis Ababa to London. I saw a video about what people call the black cowboy in the United States.
Yes.
And that video showed that there are about 30% of cowboy in the United States from black. Why? Because those people was free from slave. Yes. And then they prefer this job because this job was more open job for them to see themselves being free in nature, to see themselves, having something they can do, and then be erased from the colonial master rooms. That was good enough. And then also in my village, I'm from Bantu tribe in West Cameroon. Our former king, who passed away about 20 years ago, his third wife was a lady, and then she's a lady from Germany. If you go on Google, you just type Bantu Queens, you will see her on the Google. And then now she identifies herself as an indigenous person in Cameroon.
Yes.
But she refused to, because based on tradition, she refused to be married to the new king, because based on traditions, tradition in the West Cameroons, when the kings pass away, the former wife becomes the wife of the new king. But some people think that their wives have to sleep with the new king, but it's not the way it works. No, they become like a kind of, let's say, we said those who have the memory of the kingdomship.
Yeah.
But she decided to remain in Bantu, and then she have big land, and then she's speaking writing and teaching Bantu languages in the school in the West Cameroon. And then she feels herself, as Zenda said, I agree with Zenda, it depends on the way people feel and agree with the value of the place, tradition of the place. It's like accepting the environment and the environment accepts you. Anyway, as you said here, there are different ways to understand and to identify or to define the term indigenous. But the one good thing, as we know, we have to get some kind of criteria like value, like spirituality, and then all those things also give us kind of attachment to the place. I don't know if I can say it like that. I know people like Zenda and Umul, Florence, they are online. They will complement our discussion. Wonderful. We just think to get these breakout sections, maybe as a resume, to just starting by the bottom, to identify the issue. Because Indigenous want to bring in principle in evaluations, but considering all those values when doing evaluations. When you send someone to Central Africa or to Barbados to do an evaluation, we agree that the person should get at least some kind of knowledge about the context and culture of the place to do a good evaluation, and also to understand the way evaluation should be done in that place. Anyway, this part of what we are trying to achieve with Indigenous. So now we have some kind of understanding about the definitions. Let's just go back to Ponge, and then I'm recording all the questions and comments. I don't know if somebody have any comments or something to share lively, so that we move back to Ponge. I didn't see any hands raised, but feel free if somebody wants to speak.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah, please, Victor. Victor, and then Florence later. Yes, Victor, please.
Allow me, please. It's only, I will try to say it slowly. Unless for Latin America, just for Latin America, only for South America. I think indigenous, what makes us indigenous is our way of thinking, our feelings, because there are many people that have many colors, and they are not, I think we cannot call them indigenous, because indigenous had to, please, I think indigenous has to do with local, with native, with native way of thinking. I still go to our first meeting, and we say there that indigenous has to do with culture and territory. It doesn't have to do with colors. It's culture, local culture, territory. And what makes us together is thoughts about a colonial way of thinking, because we are now in decolonial, try to think in other different ways that we were colonize our minds. So that's what I like to try to say. It doesn't have to do for us, it doesn't have to do with color. It has to do with thinking, way of thinking. And we were all colonized. We were all colonized with Occidental, European, Central European thought. And that's why we all have a colonial way of thinking, a patriarchal way of thinking. I hope I could make myself somehow clear.
Wonderful. Simple and very clear. Simple and very clear. Excellent. Florence, and then finally Umu, and then we move to Ponge, please, so that at the end we get 20 minutes left, because we planned so many time for discussion, introduction. Umu was saying something. Umu?
No, actually, I wasn't saying. I just chatted in the chat room just to support what Victor was saying.
Hello, Florence?
He's online but muted.
Florence?
Maybe she can make a contribution in the next session.
Anyway, okay, let's continue, and then we'll get back to Florence later. Ponge, let me go back to you now to continue with our presentations.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you so much. Excellent discussion.
That's what we discussed. And now on this question of definition of indigeneity and Africanity, the first one is what the various groups have discussed and ruled out that it is now outdated and needs to be refined. This is from the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Persons of 2007. Article 2 talks about indigenous peoples and individuals being free and equal to all other peoples. Article 3 talks about them having the right to self-determination. And by virtue of that right, they determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. And then Article 13.1 talks about the right of these indigenous people to revitalize, use, develop, and transmit to future generations. Then based on this UN declaration, I think we are complementing it with the African Commission on their set criteria on what an indigenous African would actually be. So the following criteria may help us in defining indigenous people, but you all have to bear in mind all the great inputs that you've given during your breakout discussions. So the key among these are self-identification as recognition by other groups as a distinct collectivity. So you identify yourself as an indigenous African. 2, Victor did talk about occupation and use of the African territory, but still bearing in mind what Victor said, color and territory does not necessarily make one indigenous, right? It is that self-identification. And then the 4th one related to that self-identification is the voluntary perpetuation of African cultural distinctiveness, right? Sharing in the social organization, spiritual values, modes of production, and all that. So that at least makes one an indigenous African. But then there's also the element of colonization and decolonization. That's now the 3rd one, which is an experience of subjugation, marginalization, dispossession, etc., which Fiona did talk about in her opening remarks. Right. Now, in trying to build a business case for the African Ethical Protocol, we do mention a few of the points here which are contained in the draft protocol. So maybe you could share your feelings about this. 1 is on the effectiveness of indigenous programs. 2, evaluator perspectives, because we find that if we have 2 different evaluators coming from different cultural backgrounds, definitely there's bound to be some variation in the evaluation outcomes. So these are some inherent biases which the evaluator is supposed to address. Then we have the tensions between the models and worldviews, and I think Victor did talk about this comprehensively, about the tension between the Western or European models and the indigenous laws or customs and worldviews. And lastly, the tension between Eurocentric frameworks and lens vis-a-vis what we may call the Afrocentric views and frameworks. Great. So why is this protocol important? The protocol is important in 2 main perspectives. 1, it's going to enhance ethical dialogue between nations. Ideally, it seeks to ensure a respectful and ethical dialogue between nations and between people in relation to conservation and sustainable use of natural resources in the process of conducting evaluations, especially in the African context. And this one brought the idea of the 5 P's of the Sustainable Development Goals, where we have people, planet, peace, prosperity, and the element of partnership. So these are very key in developing this ethical dialogue between nations. And then most importantly, the respect to indigenous communities. So the overall goal of showing respect to indigenous communities in Africa is critical in this protocol. Right. Now I'll just share this in passing, the findings of the survey that we did conduct. The survey was conducted between June 2nd and July 2nd for 1 whole month. It had 16 questions, and we were lucky to get 583 responses. Out of these, 581 were somehow incomplete. because I think maybe the time when the survey was closed found them when they were still in the process of responding to the survey. So the completion rate generally was 100%, and the typical time spent was 10 minutes, 32 seconds, which was a lot of time, but I'm so happy that 583 people were able to sit down for 10 minutes and 32 seconds to respond to this survey. So the main areas where we collected the information from was from email invitations. We had 427 responses. From LinkedIn responses, we had 71 responses. From Facebook, we had 30 responses. And from Twitter, we had 54 responses. In terms of gender of the respondents, 62% were male, while 38% were female. Out of these, the concentration of the respondents was between the ages of 25 and 54, right? Who account for nearly 60 to 70% of the total respondents. And then on the question of race, because still on what Victor said, that color and geographical location does not make one indigenous. So we do have the white population who identify as Africans. We had 2.6%. Blacks constituted the majority, 94.34. We have Asians nearly 1%, Arabs nearly 1%, and then others who identified themselves as other, that is not belonging to any of the mentioned categories. We asked the question on the country of origin, and here we did mention that only African countries apply. So here we meant that even if you are in the diaspora, but your country of origin is in Africa, then you are free to respond to this survey. So in terms of country responses, Kenya was leading with nearly 69%. We have Tanzania with 4%, Nigeria 3%, Uganda 3%, Ethiopia and South Africa about 2%, 2.4%, and then others 2%. Cameroon nearly 2%. Eric, in what ways would you wish to see indigenous knowledge protected during evaluations in Africa? And here from the responses, the leading response was that there's need to recognize the value of traditional knowledge at 77%. Then there's need to support the indigenous knowledge systems at 70%, and promoting and conserving, promote conservation and preservation of indigenous knowledge at 74%. So those three choices were the leading for this particular question. We also asked the people ways in which they would wish to see the Afrocentric paradigm manifested in evaluations. Some did complain about the term Afrocentric as being too technical for the local respondents or audience, but all the same, we managed to get the highest response here, being that researchers must work to legitimize the centrality of African ideals, values as valid frame of reference for inquiry and acquiring and examining data. So that's the greatest that you are able to pick from this question. In terms of ways in which you would wish to see indigenous evaluation promote creativity, we had greatest responses as one, ensuring proper attribution of rights through recognition of indigenous knowledge, right? And two, encourage, reward, and protect traditional-based creativity and innovation. And I think here, I would really be interested in knowing from the participants what are some of these traditional-based creativity and innovations that we would need to encourage and reward. Right. How would you wish to see respect for prior informed consent translated in practice? Generally, the greatest response was that indigenous knowledge should not be used for commercial purposes, without the voluntary and conscious consent of its holders. So that must be key. Anytime you want to use indigenous knowledge for commercial purposes, you must get the consent, and it must be voluntary of the holders of that indigenous knowledge. Then, how does indigenous evaluation promote economic and social development? And two main choices here. One is recognizing the rights of traditional and local communities over their knowledge. And two, identification, documentation, transmission, and revitalization, as well as promotion of the cultural heritage of the people. In terms of acknowledging the custodianship, ownership, and property rights, the majority of the respondents were of the view that it should promote fair benefit sharing arising from the use of indigenous knowledge. In terms of justification of equitable sharing of benefits, the bulk of the respondents were of the view that we should prevent exploitation and misuse of indigenous knowledge by non-holders, right? We already talked about their consent. You cannot use it without their consent, voluntary consent. But again here, we should prevent anybody trying to exploit or misuse the knowledge by non-holders. Which of the following evaluation concepts help in identifying the evaluative impulse in local African culture? Because it's there in the literature that Africans are notoriously evaluative in thinking. And I wish we had some of the greats like Thomas Archibald of evaluative thinking. I would have wished him to make a contribution to this, that Africans are intuitively evaluative in thinking. So the responses for this, the greatest or the highest response was on stakeholder involvement, collective effort, and political discretion. Right, now in your personal assessment, which of the following are the key values of an Afrocentric evaluation? And again here, this maybe must have been a very technical question and may not have been understood clearly, but still the biggest, the highest response comes from this choice on building community relationships and to inform evaluation intent, motive, and methodology. That before you get to the local community to conduct any evaluation, you must establish rapport with the local community, inform them about the intent of your evaluation and even the methodology, and try to get input from the local community. In terms of typical statements within a consent form, majority of the respondents feel that the purpose, process, and duration of the project must be contained in the consent form, as well as indication that the participation of the respondents is voluntary and they can withdraw at any time. So any consent form that you design for an indigenous evaluation must indicate that the survey, the evaluation, the participation of the respondents is voluntary and they can withdraw at any time. Now, in terms of the ethical considerations during evaluation, majority of the respondents feel that informed consent is key, voluntary participation is key, as well as confidentiality. The others, like do no harm, anonymity, and others were not actually prioritized by majority of the respondents. So we picked the top three of informed consent, voluntary participation, as well as confidentiality. And lastly, this is the question that we were discussing in our breakout groups. And in terms of responses, the highest number of people, of the respondents, picked the idea of self-identification as belonging to an indigenous people, nation, or community, as well as recognition by others as a distinct collectivity, but we will be able to include all the different ideas that came from the discussion. I was thinking that maybe we could go to this, Eric, if time can allow, maybe 10 minutes or...
Thank you so much, Ponge. I think that's good enough, because this even the core part of the webinar. But after your presentation now, we go back to our colleague.
We go?
We are going to go back to, to participants.
Yeah.
To look about, what do they think about the main ethical principle that should guide evaluations or evaluator in Africa. As one more again, they have to just think, our colleague from Asia, thinking about Asia, just the word African doesn't have to change anything. So let's go back again. We have time. I'm happy that we have time because we are supposed to end at in 30 minutes. We have time. So let's go back to the breakout sections. Let's keep the same group because to keep the same spirit of the discussion, and then do the same way, and then allocate now 10 minutes. We just give like bullet form, the main ethical principle. People just take it as a bullet. Of course, depending to the way we can discuss in your group. So let's say 10 minutes, and then we'll be back to recap. And then we give about 3 minutes for each group to recap later. So that it's going to be 20, so we have 10 minutes for the last one. So if it's good for all, let me just automatically again get you back to your rooms. And then we'll see you back in 10 minutes. Thank you so much.
Right, you're back again.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Beverly. Hi, Lenise.
Hi.
Yeah. Aumo, you'll be able to write?
As long as I am on. So very, yes. Quickly.
Maybe, Lenise, you can help Aumo? Maybe the two of you should write so that in the event that one...
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But you know what, Punch? If I write in the chat box and I'm expelled, what I have written disappears.
No, don't write in the chat box. Write on Word.
I take notes, yeah.
Type on Word, and then when we go back to the main room, you just copy from Word and paste in the chat box.
Okay, great, yeah. So
yeah.
in Word, okay, so I have to open a Word. Okay, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So main ethical principles that should guide evaluators, okay? It's evaluators. So, yeah, back to, why don't we start with Beverly this time?
Yes.
I'm still pondering this issue, but I think the part about, I don't know, I'm not sure what I would label as most important, but the part about being sure that any use of people's information is that they've approved that use.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think part of that is somehow being sure that they've had an opportunity to review it and see that it's presented from their perspective. I think it's easy for somebody to distort, if they don't understand the culture, they may easily distort the comments that were made. So I'm not quite sure where to get that in here.
Yeah, so what
I
understand is that you need to be genuine to what people are saying.
Yeah, that you really have to, and that you have to somehow talk, feed back to people what you're understanding so that you actually communicate accurately what their intention and position is.
To respect the integrity of the data, is this?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Integrity of the data, and also be, let's say, clear or transparent on the use of the data.
Yeah.
I think it's important. Transparent on the use, consent and use. That's the words that I'm hearing. Consent is very important. Feedback is important, and transparency.
Good.
I want to add a little bit to what Beverly just said. I would even go before the point of the use, but also even how the data is gathered, that it is really in a way that is ethical, respectful, you know, no harm came to the person or community to get there. There's no deceit. Sorry, I'm still on my computer. There's no there's no hiding when it comes to collecting the data. I thought my camera was on just now. Sorry. Right?
Yeah. So when you say no hiding, what do you mean?
Okay, so I have been with people who okay, so let me just say it differently. Whenever I begin an interview with someone, I say to them, I would like to record it because I will never be able to write as quickly as you are speaking, because I want to be able to capture. But I want you to trust me that no one else will hear this recording except me.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I'm saying that there are people who might go to a meeting, as has happened in a couple times in the Caribbean, where you are there with one project, but the same community is part of an intervention from about 3 or 4 different projects. And in your and other project personnel, they visit your activity, they're there to observe. But then what is shared with persons, or what comes out of your activity somehow then ends up being reported in their thing, or being used against being used not to the benefit of the community. You know what I mean? So then how they test it, and what you gather and when you gather is also critical, you know?
Yeah, so evaluators needs to be mindful of how can I make that to be transparent in the way data is going to be collected, stored, and used, and maybe destroyed later on, things like that. So
Right.
to protect the privacy, privacy and safety of the
especially that safety piece, that safety piece.
Yeah, safety, privacy. There's also one idea is the evaluators need to be knowledgeable of the power differences into the community, and to make sure they give a space to underprivileged people or things like that to participate to the data collection process as well, because they are not they might not be mindful of the realities, the intimate realities of the community, but they need to invest enough time and expertise to understand those power balances in the community, and need to exercise, I don't know how to make it. If you guys know the word, just help me. But the idea is to make sure that underprivileged people are given equal opportunity to contribute. Yeah.
I also want to say, in terms of that power, there's power within the community, and then there's another kind of power with you being the evaluator going in. So that if you identify, I'm here on behalf of this particular agency, or because I'm looking at this particular, what happens with this particular intervention, then people may also see the evaluator as having power.
Power, yes, yeah.
You know, so there's also that piece.
So power dynamics, yes. And how would us frame this There are two types of power. The power, let's say the settings, the community settings, and the evaluation setting itself. So the evaluator needs to be aware of both.
Yes. Yeah. And that's why I know that building trust piece is really critical. But sometimes if you're only going in for, you're there for 2 days, or you're there for, 2 days collecting data within a community, is to get that trust piece going. And I don't think I have a good answer, or maybe a unique answer, except to say that it's always important to me that whoever the gatekeepers are truly understand my purpose, right? So that as they present me or they introduce me to the community, to the organization, whatever, they're clear about my purpose, and that I really try to present myself as trustworthy.
So you mean the evaluation purpose?
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm getting Lenny's right. Does it mean that at the point when the evaluator is moving into the community, he or she has to do some sort of a stakeholder analysis and be able to know who are the marginalized and not, so that their views can be captured?
Right. Yeah, that's also part of the power issue. Yes, you're absolutely right.
Great.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the main room. I hope you got wonderful discussions. Maybe let's keep the same after the resume. So you just finalize the last slide, okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So let me just let's go back now to the presentation of room discussions. Let's start again with room 1. Room 1, how about you, please? You have 2 minutes, please.
Cynthia, would you like to talk about your points from our room?
Sure. So from our discussion, we're discussing on the main ethical principles, and what we discussed is more of the co-design and co-working, and people share the different sentiments in the community and the indigenous community, and the co-working is how evaluators can bring can be able to share what they have with the community, and the community sharing what they have with the evaluators, getting to have a co-learning environment, and also brought about the different tools. I don't know if we were actually arguing. We were just seeing it if at all it is a principle or it's an ethic on bringing the gender issue, or a framework on bringing the gender issue and using gender sensitive tools in evaluation. And in terms of that, we're discussing on matters outcome harvesting and on matters rapid outcome mapping. So yeah, involving men and women in doing that. Yeah, that is just generally it. Fiona can add on that, and Victor, if I just left something out.
That was great.
Excellent. I'm happy that your group mates also agree that. And then please copy and paste on the chat buttons. And then let's move to room 2. Room 2, where we have Beverly, Omo, and Lenise.
Okay, let me start. And the discussion focus on the stakeholder analysis and the importance to be inclusive and to apply equity in identifying whoever will be involved in the data collection, to recognize that there are power dynamics in the community, but also within the evaluation setup, to be sure that any use of people's information is approved, that people have an opportunity to review the information shared, to be genuine to people, to respect the integrity of the data, be transparent on the use of the information, use consent, feedback, principles of no harm. And we even illustrated, for instance, no hiding in collecting data, such as you're recording data and people don't know. And B, be transparent when you're recording and respect the data privacy, safety, and right. I think that's the main elements of discussion. Ponge, do you maybe want to add?
No, I think you captured it effectively.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Excellent, Umo.
Okay, great. So agreement has been done. So let's move to room 3. Room 3, over to you.
Hi guys. So we literally discussed three options, which have already been stated by other groups. We talked about transparency, talked about consent, to where if you're going to take pictures of these people, they need to know before they show up in a journal somewhere, in some magazine or whatever. We talked about respect for the community where you're carrying out the evaluation at. We also talked about a practice of sharing findings with them after you're done with interacting with them for purposes of engaging in the future. It would be fantastic for them to get feedback from you. That way it's not just about hi, bye, and then you disappear. So those are primarily the 3 that we talked about. Thanks.
Perfect. Excellent. Well done. Well done. And then group 4.
For group 4, hello guys.
Yeah, please. Over to you.
Actually, most of our points had been captured, but I'll just repeat. We all different principles that we came up with. So there was the principle of transparency, which includes honesty. There was integrity, and also respecting the values and traditions of the indigenous people, and also consent before asking for any information from the indigenous people. Then there was one thing we've noticed from the survey that was conducted, that the action of do no harm to the population had very little. The survey, according to the survey, it was not captured by many people, but according to us, this principle should actually be very paramount to an evaluator. We should not do any harm to the indigenous population. And also the principle of empowerment and participation to the indigenous individuals, because we know with power, we can create a difference to the individual, the indigenous people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Lovely. And then, maybe before we go back to interactions, and Florence will start there. Let me go back to Ponge for the last 4 slides, and then we will recap with the comment. Maybe we do the wrong right. So let's go to the comment first. Ponge, comment first. And then I think, I hope you have Florence now. Florence, we miss you. We lost you. And then please unmute yourself, Florence, if you still have the same comment. And then we collect any other observation from participants.
Thank you, Serge. I am back on now. I was, you had to step away for a minute. So I'm sorry that I wasn't here if you had asked me before, but right now, to be honest with you, I don't even remember what it was I was going to say. So I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
We were discussing about definition of indigenous evaluators or indigenous persons. And then we missed your point at that time. So, but anyway, if you can just remember, that's fine. Or maybe we give back the floor to any other, and Ponge will share the last slide, and then maybe you remember what he was talking to say to us.
Yes, I will try and recapture what it was I was thinking about at the time. Sorry. In your moment here.
Yeah. Ponge, over to you.
Actually, this is a living discussion. So even after today, if you remember anything that you would have wished to say, but you are not able to say, I'll share with you our contact so that you can share with us. It's a living discussion.
Ponge, go ahead, and then we share the last slide, and then we recap.
Thank you.
You have 20 minutes left.
The main co-ethical principles that we've already included in the draft protocol, and which are going to be modified and updated based on some of the ideas, the great ideas that we just discussed in the breakout rooms, are as follows. One, we've talked about the issue of credibility of accountability mechanisms as a key principle. We need to curb misappropriation of indigenous knowledge, especially misuse by evaluators without the knowledge or the authorization of the indigenous community or holders of the knowledge. We need to have meaningful consultation and participation, as well as respect for diversity. Then we have the issue of promoting the respect for rights of the indigenous community, enhance a sense of agency. That is, the evaluator should, as much as possible, practically possible, enhance the individual sense of agency as well as their ownership of the issues that they raise during the evaluation. Then this need for respect for indigenous knowledge, I think that one has really been addressed, and most of the groups did appreciate this. And respect for confidentiality. The evaluation team must ensure confidentiality is respected at all times. Yeah, and then what Wycliffe just talked about, the evaluation should be guided by the principle of do no harm, so as not to expose the respondent. So that's really key, Wycliffe of group 4. Then there's the issue of prior informed consent. At all times, the evaluator must have prior informed consent of the local community. Here we have consent at 2 levels. We have the individual consent as well as communal consent, given the communal nature of the indigenous African communities. Then the issue of inclusivity, I think many groups have talked about the issue of having a gender sensitive tool as well as the element of equity and inclusivity. Then building trust with participants, demonstrating to the local communities that you value their contributions and that you are actually going to benefit from the information that they share with you. Then there's the element of reciprocity, mutual benefit and equal sharing, especially of the benefits of the evaluation for purposes of learning, as well as making decisions about what needs to be done and what needs not to be done. Right. And lastly, but not the least, the evaluations should be led by the community, and they should address the needs of the local community. And the evaluator should at all times strive to establish positive working relationships with the local communities. That is, they should build mutual trust and cooperation between the local communities and the donors or the project implementers. So, for any further information regarding EvalIndigenous, you can get in touch with the co-chairs, that's Fiona and Eric Sage. And for any issues touching on the draft protocol, anyone who may have wished to say something but forgot, or maybe a new idea has just come to you, you can email me on the email address that is put down there. I think I'll be able to share with you the slides, all those who have attended today, so you'll be able to get the email addresses. If you want to join EvalIndigenous, you can talk to the two, send mail to the two, and if you have any ideas on the draft protocol, send to me. Otherwise, I want to thank you so much for giving me time to present this draft draft protocol, as well as share with you the results of the evaluation that we conducted and in which you participated. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sir Ponge. Well done. And then just to say again that your input, we are going to put all this into the draft protocol. It's going to be made available also on our web pages, and then we share with all you guys. So all your funding and contributions are going to count, and then we are going to revise and to get the final protocol. And also, we plan also to share some copy, of course, during the Africa Conference Company, and then even the CES conference. Anyway, so we take it everywhere with us. And as I said, that was the starting point to get that protocol, ethical protocol for evaluations, this side for Africa. And then we hope to continue now with other part of the world, Asia, and then at the end we see if there's a differences and what are the more commonality between the ethical protocol to do an evaluation. So maybe we are out done with last. I don't know if there's any last question about we want to mention. I didn't see because I think we cover all the questions in the presentations. Maybe yes, Umu. The French definition is I don't have the good answer for the French definition of indigenous. And then I know maybe you will help me, but I don't know yet the good one. Maybe I don't know if anyone have an answer to how do we say indigenous in French or in Spanish or in Portuguese. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe to have to find. But is there any final thought from you guys for the audience? We have 5 minutes left. The final comment, final talk. So before we closing,
I have a question or something to think about, Eric.
Yeah, please, Florence.
Florence.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I'm wondering at what conceptual space does the ethical protocol, where does it meet the guidelines, the AFRIA guidelines for evaluation? So we do have guidelines that AFRIA has created on the basis of standards for practice. And my question is, how do the ethical protocols sit, ethical protocols for indigenous populations? Where do they sit? Are we considering the continent as an indigenous space? Are we saying that when we're dealing with particular groups that we recognize and label as indigenous communities, this is where this protocol should be applied or applicable? I just wanted to find out what our thoughts are. I mean, we don't have to answer right away. I'm just putting something out there in the space for us to think about. But maybe Awar has, since he was dealing with this subject matter for some time, maybe he has thought about it and maybe he has some ideas to share.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much, Florence, for that beautiful question. In fact, that's why Zenda was here at the start, although she had to leave after 40 minutes. And you are aware of the work that AFRIA is doing with regard to the African evaluation guidelines. And she was really impressed and was thinking that there could be points of convergence between the ethical protocol and the African evaluation guidelines. Ideally, if you read that, if you read the document, the actual draft protocol, you'll see that I've also referred to the African ethical guidelines. And this was the initial webinar that we are having. Chairman Eric will agree with me that we had sent a request to AFRIA if we could do a joint webinar. And one of the things that we are going to do in the joint webinar was like discuss points of convergence between the African ethical, African evaluation guidelines, AFRIA evaluation guidelines, and the Indigenous African ethical protocol. Ideally, they may stand as two distinct documents, but they will be complementing one another. So there'll be need for that webinar, joint webinar with AFRIA, where we can find areas of complementarity of the two. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have my worries and anxieties about having two distinctly different documents.
Yeah.
So yeah. I really think that at some point we must come to agree on one document that has ideas from both, because if you have two different documents, then people can pick and choose what they want to abide by. But I don't think that that is a useful thing. If we consider Africa as an indigenous, as a space for indigenous communities scattered all over the place, then we should have something that is genuinely African and speaks to the African spirit.
Excellent. I think I do agree. And then there should be a place of complementarity between. Here we are calling Africa Ethical Protocol, and then we have our biggest umbrella Made in Africa evaluation approach. Anyway, I think the discussion is on the way, and then I hope that with the next webinar, we want to be a joint webinar with Afreya. We may get more time to talk about it. And then about another question, I think I should say, let's make it open to see how people ethically frame themselves into the evaluation in Africa. And then I do believe with the definition people share that yes, indigenous it has nothing to do with the color. It has nothing to do with the color. It did with spirituality, culture, territory, local thinking, livings, and then and so on and so forth. Because today we know that many people, whatever the kind of their color, can be identified as indigenous, not only in Africa but in Asia or in Europe or in North America. So maybe guys, as I said, we have only 1 minute left. We at EvalIndigenous promise to get next webinar, and then as I said again, we are thinking about having another webinar on the decolonizing evaluations. But we start working on that to get this part of our next 2021 activities on board, and then we share with you the upcoming thought about it. But before that, we are going to get a panel discussion during the CS conference, the Canadian Evaluation Association conference next year, and also during the Afreya conference. So let me take this opportunity to thank you all for being able to join and participate. I thank you so much for your, for the time and the value of your contribution during the breakout sections. Special thanks to Ponge for these works with your team. This was very wonderful. Let me hand over to Fiona. Maybe if you don't have a last word to say, and then we keep in touch for the next webinar. Fiona?
Oh no, just thanks everyone. It's been an amazingly fruitful discussion. I've really enjoyed it, and I hope it continues.
Yeah, thank you so much, Victor. Thank you, Victor, we saw your face again today, and we are so happy to see that the way you become a wonderful elder with the white beard. I like it so much.